Hey everyone, welcome back to my second channel, and I thought it's about time to start talking about the Crew Motorfest closed beta, which has ended I think just a couple hours ago at the time of recording this video. So yeah, what are my overall thoughts on the Crew Motorfest? It was obviously still the closed beta, so there will probably be some issues that are gonna be ironed out, etc, etc. I think overall this is going to be the game for the most part as we're gonna see it in I think September or October. I think September it releases in like six weeks or so. Overall, I thought the game was fine. It was fun. I think the fun factor is really like the best part of the game. I think that's where they put most of their effort into just making the game as fun as possible. Now, despite fun obviously being the main point of a video game, there were some shortcomings along the way that I'll be talking about, specifically when it comes to the single player content. And also it just felt very dated. I'll come back to this later. Let's just talk about the positives for now. So I suppose the first thing that really struck me as positive was that the game in general seems to take vibes over realism. This is a little bit hard to explain, but I hope with the footage that I show on screen, this is a little bit more obvious. So the game has like massively exaggerated colors and lighting, and especially the main festival hub is really designed absolutely over the top. And I quite like that. For a game that is obviously trying to be a bit more on the arcadey side than, let's say, Forza Horizon, I think this totally works. I like colorful games as well, so I think the game looked great. Like, just in terms of vibes, this was just a fun game to just kind of like lose yourself in, if you will, you know? I think in general, like, one problem that Forza Horizon has had over the years is that they lean way too much into the realism aspect. I specifically like, and I think a lot of people really still prefer the first Forza Horizon because that one, just like the Crew Motorfest, took vibes over realism. They didn't care if the sunset looks like authentic or realistic. Like, no, they just blasted you with orange light through the entire map. And it was great, right? It was absolutely fantastic. They didn't care if the main festival side was, you know, believable or not. They just made it as big and as grandiose as possible. And I think a lot of that philosophy did kind of like seep into the Crew Motorfest. And you'd like to see it, you know? Now, beyond the vibes, because obviously that's like a very subjective thing, I think one thing that's less subjective is the handling improvements. So I think a lot of people weren't really a fan of the Crew's handling before. And the main problem really was that it felt a little bit too floaty and the cars couldn't really lose traction. Like, there wasn't really any like satisfying drifting going on. That has been basically entirely fixed. So your car can now properly lose and gain traction based on what's going on, whether you press the handbrake or not. And you can actually pull off some decent power slides or drifts. It doesn't feel like super amazing, but it gets the job done. You know, I think it's fine enough, and the fact that this is generally like an improvement over the previous Crew games is already enough. You know, I didn't expect like top-of-the-shelf Forza handling, neither should any of you. But this totally gets the job done for just an arcade racer in an open world. It felt fun enough to just do races and explore the map. So that's just generally an improvement. I think in general I would explain the handling as a mix of the Crew 2 and Driver San Francisco, funnily enough, because just like in Driver San Francisco, at low speed, if you're slamming the throttle down, your car will just wheel spin all over the place, right? And you have to control it or either use assists. Whereas on higher speeds, I think it still feels mostly like the Crew 2, like just the way the car's momentum works and how the weight shifts around, it still feels very much like the Crew 2, but a little bit more refined, if you will. Now, beyond the handling, I think one thing that I also really liked, and this is probably the biggest plus point I can give to the game, it's event variety. I honestly think this is something that so many racing game franchises have completely abandoned. And it's probably a reason why a lot of people prefer older racing games, right? It's because they had more to offer in terms of just game modes. Like, can you imagine Underground 2 only having sprint and circuit races? I can't, but that's unfortunately the reality we're living in. Like, if you look at a Forza or a Need for Speed even, what does Need for Speed have? You have your sprint races, maybe a circuit race, which honestly those two aren't that different from each other. And then you have drifting. That's it. And no, I don't count Takeover as a separate event. It's just drifting with extra steps. But in the Crew Motorfest, you have so many more modes, you have so much more variety, you have drifting with its own separate handling model, you have actual drag racing that isn't like in Forza where it's just a regular race in a straight line, but actually has like proper mechanics like warming up tires and, you know, perfect shifting, just like in old games that we all love so much, right? And even those events that aren't like inherently different in terms of mechanics, they make up for it in just redesigning tracks completely. So I think this is fantastic, and I think in terms of variety, this is probably the best modern racing game we're gonna get for the moment. And I really hope that a lot of games, like a lot of other franchises, really take a page out of the Crew Motorfest's book in that regard. We need more variety like this. I already talked a little bit about vibes earlier, and I think vibes is sort of closely connected to the map. And I gotta say, I really liked the map design. There were some issues I had with the map as well, we'll come to those later, but just in terms of how the map is designed, I quite liked it. You have a really great variety of roads. You have like, a bunch of like winding roads and almost toge stuff, and then you have long highways going through tunnels. Like pretty much everything is there. There isn't really much to complain about when it comes to just the roads themselves that are on the map. You also have like proper race tracks on it, which I think is really cool. I think during the in the main festival area, there's like an actual proper racetrack with like bankings and everything. And beyond that, to just kind of like go away from roads and go back to like the actual map design. Big cities. Crazy concept, right? But yeah, big cities. You have like actually several cities scattered across the map, but like one really, really big one. That feels really nice, I gotta say. And yeah, other than that, you have different areas, like, you always know when you're more up north, or you always kind of like know where you are on the map roughly based on your surroundings, which I think is great, right? Like like I think that's one problem that Unbound had, that you had the city in the east, I think, and then the rest was just like basic forest area that felt super samey. That's not the case with the Crew Motorfest. You have different areas and it all feels like very distinct, which I think is great. And I think in general, like the way the map is designed, it is way smaller than in the Crew 2, but I think it still works great. And one last thing that I really want to touch on, and this is one thing that I also like, that really surprised me, honestly. It's that there's a lot of originality in multiplayer mode. So I already talked a little bit about the event variety earlier. That also does extend to the multiplayer, but it's even more original there. So for example, you now have a great race event, which starts like every couple of minutes. And it's basically, it utilizes this mechanic that the Crew 2 had, but never really utilized, where you kind of switch your car mid-race. This is something that I think only like a small handful of races in the Crew 2 had. And I think it's easily one of the game's most underutilized mechanics. They actually found a way to properly implement it during races now. So now you have these great races, which are like, I think 10 minutes, which by the way, I think is a fantastic length for a race in general in multiplayer. 10 minutes is perfect length for multiplayer race. And during that race, you pick several different cars that you want to use. And during the race, you basically change your car mid-event. So you might be driving the first 3 minutes in a street race car, and then you switch to I don't know, like an off-road car of some sort, only to then 3 minutes later for the final stretch go back to a hypercar. And all of this works like within the multiplayer race. I think it's fantastic. It makes the races super chaotic. It also doesn't help that these races have, I think, like up to 28 players in them. So they are super chaotic, but they are the fun kind of chaos. It doesn't feel like bullshit or anything. It's just a lot of fun. And beyond that, you have a different kind of take on Battle Royale. Now, obviously, Battle Royale, I think at this point is kind of like, I don't think it's that popular anymore, but at least they put like an interesting spin on the Battle Royale thing. Now, if you remember, like in the Horizon series, you had, especially in Horizon 4 and 5, they had their own Battle Royale themed thing, which was called the Eliminator. The Crew is a little bit different, where they actually take the Destruction Derby cars that they, I think, added in an update to the Crew 2, and they kind of make that the central point. So you now drop, it was actually really fun that you drive a plane and you have full control over where you drop because you are controlling the plane. And then you drop into the map, and there's like a bunch of pickups, like you can do more damage or repairs or a shield or whatever. And the last driver to survive actually wins. So it's not race-based like in the Eliminator from Forza, but you actually like destroy others and you ram each other. It's kind of like Wreckfest, a little bit cheaper feeling Wreckfest, but in Battle Royale. I think it was really fun. But yeah, I think that kind of sums up my positives. It took me quite a while to get through this, which should kind of give you an idea that I think overall the game was fun. I think all of these positives together, even with all the negatives that I'll be getting to, they still matter, and I think ultimately they still are the reason why Motorfest was such a fun time overall. But yeah, unfortunately, as I said earlier, it's not without its faults, and I'll get into those right about now. So I guess the first thing that really like bothered me, and you know, if you know what kind of games I like, you probably know that this is like kind of annoying for me in particular, but it might not be for you. So the single player main progression career was very handholdy. So basically the way the game works for the first couple of hours is the game gives you like these playlists. And a playlist is basically just an assortment of events that you play in a certain order. And these events are completely preset. The game gives you a specific car and puts you into a specific event, and you do it in the order that the game asks for. Now, this doesn't really sound like an issue until you realize that this is basically exactly like the GT Cafe menu books. Exactly the same, only that they may be a little bit more interesting. And the reason why this is kind of annoying, especially for the first few hours, is because in the beginning you choose the starter car and you get upgrades, you earn money, but you don't actually use your car. You actually don't get to use your car at all, other than to drive to the next event where you once again just get thrown into some sort of preset event. Like it just feels like it makes the entire car building and just car collecting aspect completely pointless, at least for the first few hours of the game, because everything is like catered and like, you know what I mean, right? And this was kind of annoying. I will be honest, this was kind of annoying because I was like, man, I have this really cool Mustang that I built up, I think it looks cool, but I can't use it. The game will not give me anything to use it. Now, frankly, once you're probably done with all the playlists, you get to exclusively use your own cars, but just keep in mind this is something that is very prevalent in the first few hours of the game. And yeah, beyond that, obviously you can't have a festival-themed racing game without terrible dialogue. If there was one thing they really should not have copied from Horizon, it's the god-awful dialogue. And I hate to admit, it is not much better here than in Forza. Characters still talk way too much. There is no story. And frankly, I don't think there needs to be a story, but there is still way too much dialogue. Like, there's so much being said. Like, there's so much speaking going on, but nothing is actually being said. Like, after like an hour, stuff went in one ear and out the other ear. And in fact, when I played it for the last time on Sunday, I completely turned off the dialogue. Like, I turned off all voices because I just didn't want to listen to it anymore. It is extremely grating, and I'm not sure why this is becoming a trend. Nobody likes this. People just tolerate it. But yeah, moving on to something that is probably a little bit more important, because, you know, terrible dialogue you can just mute and just move on. What you can't really ignore is that the Crew Motorfest, just like the previous game and Forza Horizon, once again plays with Fomo content. I hate that shit, full stop. I'm gonna be super honest on that. I hate Fomo content, and the Crew Motorfest does it again. So you might be familiar with the summits. They are basically the same thing, but different, as the, you know, festival season playlists in Forza Horizon, where you have to do like specific things, do specific tests, PR stunts or whatever, or specific events, and, you know, if you do enough of them, you get some kind of like exclusive car. However, I think Motorfest pulls this off even worse, because at least in Horizon, you are basically guaranteed to get, you know, the FOMO cars or the cars that disappear after a while, as long as you just do everything, which isn't too difficult. The way it works in Motorfest is you are basically ranked in a playlist, and however well you perform in the events that, you know, in each weekly season, if you will, it puts you in a leaderboard, and only when you are in like the top 10,000, you will actually get the exclusive car. Now, as far as I know, that's already how it worked in the Crew 2, and I honestly think that blows. I think that's such a horrible way to, you know, design FOMO content, and if anything, it incentivizes cheaters, because cheaters want to get those cars, so they're absolutely gonna cheat to be faster or give themselves more money to upgrade cars higher or whatever. I just think it's a horrible concept, and the fact that it's still like that in the game just kind of sucks. Now, one thing that I didn't remember from the Crew 2 that I think might have been different now in the Crew Motorfest is that the large majority of your points for these summit playlists you get through events. And all of these events require you to buy specific cars. Now, this has some very, very concerning implications, because they can basically create a summit event for a week and basically lock all of these events behind paywalled cars, so cars that you can only buy with the premium currency of the game, crew credits. Or they basically just create events where you have to bring a car that is way too expensive to buy through just regular gameplay, so you either have to grind for hours to get anywhere, or you once again, you know, pay reward money. I just think this system is terrible. I don't like any of this, and I don't think I want to interact with this when I get to play the full game. I hate Fomo content, and I think the way Motorfest handles it is by far the worst way. Now, if we're gonna stick with multiplayer for a little moment, I also found it kind of weird how Motorfest didn't really seem to have any standard multiplayer modes. So I already talked about the Great Race and the Derby Battle Royale, and I thought those were really fun. But if you just want to do like a 3 to 4 minute race in street cars or hypercars, you're shit out of luck. Either I couldn't find it, in which case it's a UI issue, but I don't think it's even in there. So if you just want to have like regular races against, you know, like a smaller amount of opponents, you can't. It doesn't exist. And beyond that, there's also no long-term rewards to even do any multiplayer in the first place. Besides for the summit, which I already talked about, which I didn't like, but it doesn't really seem like there's any long-term reason to interact with the multiplayer in the first place, than to just earn more money, I guess. But yeah, that kind of sums up all of my thoughts on, you know, the multiplayer, the goods and the bads. However, there's just one more thing that I really have to mention. I think this is really what bogged down the game quite a bit for me. In short, the game feels very dated. It doesn't really scream next gen, or I guess current gen, to me. It doesn't feel like a game released in the year 2023 by a AAA company. Not even in the slightest. It feels like a game that could have just as easily released in 2019 or 2020. And this already became kind of obvious with the 60 FPS lock on PC. Now, people are making a huge deal out of this when, you know, I gotta acknowledge, in reality, only a small minority of people would actually be able to play the game on PC in more than 60 FPS. But still, it doesn't excuse the fact that it is a thing, that you are locked to 60 FPS on PC. If people have better hardware, if people paid money for better hardware, they should be able to use it, right? There's thousands, tens of thousands of games way older than the Crew Motorfest that allow for higher frame rates. There is almost no reason for a 60 FPS lock to exist on PC. But I'll be honest, that in of itself wouldn't necessarily be like a deal breaker for me. However, it kind of is once we add a bunch of stuff together. So the next thing that I noticed is that the map, however much I praised it earlier in terms of design, I also have to admit it is completely deserted. It is super dead. It is especially this was super obvious in the city. If in the edits, I think in the edit I'll add some footage to facilitate my point. But the city is completely dead. There are no more pedestrians. There's barely any traffic, and even the wildlife has been mostly eradicated. This is something that I really loved the Crew 1 for, and I think a lot of people did, because not only was the Crew 1's map huge, but it also felt alive. So there was pedestrians walking around, there was a lot of traffic, and if you were driving through forest areas, for example, you would have herds of bisons or sheep or whatever the hell, you know, crossing over the road. It really felt like an alive map. And that's just not really a thing anymore, which doesn't make sense to me because the map is now smaller. Like, you'd think if they condense the landmass, they can make it more lively, but that's not the case. It actually manages to feel more dead than the previous two games. And then you also add the fact that this is a game for like the new generation, and it just like it's a bit of a head scratcher, you know, like you have the 60 FPS lock and yet the game has like a lot less going on. What's going on? And then just to rub more salt in the wound, when you enter first person mode in the Crew Motorfest, you'll find out that the rearview mirrors are still blurred. Why? There is actually less going on the map, and we are on better hardware nowadays. Why are the rearview mirrors still blurred? The first Test Drive Unlimited had more going on and had working rearview mirrors. What is that? Like, I feel like at this point it must be some kind of engine limitation, because like, why are the rearview? It's not a huge thing, obviously, right? It's not a huge thing, but it's just like you take all of these things together that I just mentioned, the 60 FPS look, the map being deserted, and now the blurry review mirrors. It just paints this picture of a game that feels incredibly dated and does not feel like a 2023 AAA racing game in the slightest, let alone a game that deserves the full asking price of $70. But yeah, let's just calm down for a moment and get to the conclusion of this. What did I think of the game overall? I think it was fun. Don't let my criticism, you know, give you the wrong idea. I still think this game was fun overall. As I said in the beginning, the fun factor, the fun factor is easily the strongest aspect of the game. And if that's all you care about, you're not gonna have any issues with this game whatsoever. However, due to the shortcomings that I've mentioned, you know, in both the multiplayer and, you know, the technical aspects and also like some other stuff, I don't think it's worth the full price. I would absolutely recommend you guys to wait for a sale and also perhaps some updates. Maybe by the time November and December rolls around, you know, maybe by then you can get the game for like a 20 or 30% discount. There have been some updates, etc, etc. That's honestly what I would wait for. I would not recommend buying this game at full price on launch. Full stop. However, regardless of what you or I think of the game, I'm just glad that it exists, and you should be too, because if there's anything we need in the racing game genre at the moment, it's more competition. It's super obvious that there have been a bunch of franchises that have grown super stagnant, particularly Forza Horizon, and you know, inevitably Horizon is going to lose players to the Crew Motorfest, which inevitably is going to make the guys working on Horizon have to work harder to earn those players back. So once again, regardless of what you or I think of the game, I'm just glad it exists, and I'm glad that we have more competition in the racing game genre. But yeah, this was a lot longer than I anticipated. I thought this was just gonna be like a 15-minute video, but I guess I had a lot to talk about. Either way, thanks for sitting with me through all of this. If you played the closed beta of the Crew yourself, do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And yeah, I think that's about all. Guys, thanks so much for watching, hanging out, appreciate it. And yeah, until the next one. Cheers.